extremely short supply. Now, on those themes, I spoke to Josh Frydenberg just a couple of hours ago. Here it is. Josh Frydenberg, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Richo.
Is it such a great day, though, when you get those growth figures that came out today, 0.2%, way below what the market was hoping for?
Well, the market expectation was 0.4%, so it's just below that. But when you consider
half.
in the March quarter, we came in at 0.9% GDP growth, one of the fastest in the developed world, and the market expectations then were 0.6%. So we did pretty well then, and there are some good signs in these numbers. I mean, the exports of services are up more than 7.3% for the year. The investment in housing is up more than 7.4% for the year. And when you consider that other resource-intensive economies like Canada, like Brazil, have gone into recession with consecutive quarters of negative growth, Australia is doing pretty well. And Richo, we are in our 25th consecutive year of economic growth. That's only ever been beaten by one other country, namely the Netherlands. So we shouldn't be too down on ourselves.
No, but the difficulty is I'm looking ahead. And I was talking to Joe Hockey on Richo and Jones last night. And I mean, even when the budget came out, Alan Jones conceded the growth numbers over the next 3 to 4 years look dodgy, but look, in his case, rubbery, in my view, dodgy. But the reality is now, but 0.2%, as you look into the future, even next year's growth, you'll be flat out getting to what you've promised, won't you?
Look, we hope to reach our target. A couple of points to mention there. There's no doubt that the Australian economy is being affected by the slowdown in China. And given, for example, iron ore is our single largest export, and when we came to government, iron ore was $120 a tonne. Today it sits at $50 a tonne. When you consider we've seen the biggest terms of trade drop in 50 years, that does affect the Australian economy. But that also underlines the need for the free trade agreement with China, because the biggest opportunities for us lie in services, lie in agriculture, lie in health and financial services. So those are underdone parts of the Australian economy as far as our exports are concerned, and you know that is very promising if we can get this China-Australia free trade agreement away.
Well, you know, the only thing the only benefit of some of the downside of the economy at the moment is how far it's pushed the dollar down, which should help exports. But then I was only thinking today, you know, here we are with a low dollar. I think today at one point it dipped below 70 cents. I think it's just above it as we speak.
Sure.
But if it's dropping that low, wouldn't it be nice to still have some of the industries who could take advantage of it? Because manufacturing, we've just lost so many jobs. In the end, now the only way you take advantage of it is flogging off iron ore and coal, and no one seems to want them at the moment.
Well, there are a lot of niche manufacturing industries going on. I mean, today in Brisbane, I went and visited a business that was making propeller blades for helicopters and exporting them. And he was saying to us, because of the low Australian dollar, the owner of this business, that it was actually creating real opportunities for them that they wanted to capitalise on. So there are plenty of good examples where niche manufacturing in Australia, involving high levels of skill, will benefit from this lower Australian dollar. I mean, if you look at agriculture, we have been behind the 8 ball, particularly in the dairy sector, because New Zealand reached a free trade agreement with China back in 2008. In that time, they've seen more than $2 billion worth of growth in their dairy industry, compared to Australia, which has just seen $70 million worth of growth. Now, if we can get this free trade agreement locked away and passed by the Parliament, and Labor, you know, will stop dancing to the tune of the union movement, then we'll create many new jobs in Australia's dairy industry, which will be fantastic for us.
Well, apart from Daniel Andrews, the Labor Premier in Victoria, you had the Labor leader in New South Wales, Luke Foley, coming out and supporting it this morning. In my view, support for the China FTA is inevitable. Labor will vote for it when the crunch comes. I'll just muck around in the meantime, but they're entitled to query some details. But the point I wanted to make about the FTA is, if you're relying on that to get you to 3% growth, you've got to be kidding. It's not going to give you that big a jump.
Well, that's just one of the areas where
what are the other ones?
Real opportunities.
Name the other ones, because I'm really interested.
Okay, well, if we can get labour market flexibility, that will be really important for Australia's productivity performance and for jobs. You know, in Victoria...
And what are you doing to get that?
Okay, well, we've just had the bill to reinstate the Australian Building and Construction Commission defeated in the Senate. Now, the ABCC was effectively a cop on the beat. It came out of the Coal Royal Commission. Now, in 2004, we lost 224 days for every 1,000 workers to industrial disputation. We lost 224 days. 2 years later, when the ABCC came into effect, those 224 days dropped to just 24 days. It produced a $6 billion annual productivity dividend. That's why we are deeply committed to reinstating the ABCC. We've got a big plan to continue.
That does not give you labour market flexibility. It gives you a cop on the beat to stop crooks in one union, and I think that. And by the way, I would have voted for it if I'd been there, because I can't understand why they voted against it. But be that as it may, that's not what will give you labour market flexibility.
Well, look, there's lots of other areas. I mean,
well, what are they? Because I can't see any.
Well, for example, greenfield sites, the legislation to try to get a quicker agreement around industrial matters relating to greenfield sites. In my own area of financial services, we were doing big changes around superannuation governance, big changes around life insurance, big changes around financial planners, more than 400,000
Again,
Australians.
that's not labour market flexibility. I mean, you've got to address it directly, and it seems to me the government, because of its fears over what happened in other years and in other elections when it came to industrial relations, you just sort of walked away. There's almost no activity on the productivity front when it comes to dealing with today's labour market.
Well, as you know, we said before the last election we'd get the Productivity Commission to prepare a review into the Fair Work Act. Now, they've given us an interim report, and before it even hit the desks of the members of Parliament and the relevant minister, the unions were out there campaigning, calling it Work Choices 2.0. Now, that sort of scaremongering campaign doesn't help us advance the issue of labour market flexibility. But it's not just in the labour market. We also need reform in tax. We also need to continue our pathways to cutting red tape. You add on top of that free trade agreements. We've got a very good story to tell.
Well, let's get to tax. You've raised it, and I wanted to get to it anyway,
sure.
So we're there. Now, here you are, you've got bracket creep is the main reason. I mean, last night Alan Jones gave the figure of 9 cents 9 cents in every 10, 90% of the numbers you're using to prop up the budget and to get into surplus rely on bracket creep. Now you've announced you're getting rid of bracket creep, which, depending upon who I believe, is between $5 and $6 billion a year, but it's a lot, a hell of a lot. And then the question is, how do you pay for it? There appears to be no plan whatsoever to pay for it. There are no cuts announced that get anywhere near it. No one has even come close. And of course, the only hint you get was Matthias Cormann last night and Joe Hockey himself last night, because broadly they want to include a review that'll get you out of trouble on the $5 or $6 billion. But when Mike Baird introduced this whole discussion about the GST, it's for the states. So far, the states use the GST money, not you. And what are you going to do? They still want to build bridges and hospitals and schools and railways and roads and all the rest of it. They want the money. You both can't have it.
Well, I mean, go back to this issue of bracket creep. It is a problem because while it's good for the government's budget numbers in the short term, it's bad for the economy in the longer term because it's a disincentive for people to stay in the workforce or to work a bit harder. And we're going from
we agree on that.
And we're going from having 27% of taxpayers today who are in the top two tax brackets, Richo, to that number being 43% within the decade. So we've got to do something about that. Now, how do we pay for it? It could be part of a broader tax reform package, but also it could be part of our initiatives to reduce spending. And when we came to government, real spending growth was at 3.5% per annum. We've got that down to 1.5% per annum. You saw us cut a deal with the Greens in the Senate over part pensions. That was a $2.4 billion
Josh,
saving.
figures, like you can all pluck out figures. Spending in 2015-16, right, will be 25.9% of GDP. Labor only exceeded that in one of its 7 years. Every other year was less. So when you talk about spending, you're not doing all that bad a job at keeping it going, are you?
No, we're actually reducing it. There's been population increases, which you have to take into account in terms of those numbers that you cite. But more importantly, we've really slowed down the rate of spending growth that we inherited. That's where Australia was getting into big problems down the track, and that's why you've heard us talk about the big debt pile that we were left, leading to $667 billion worth of debt. That's why we were paying today $1 billion a month just on the interest bill on that debt. That's why we have to get that under control, but also where we can provide tax cuts, we will. And, you know, for small business, Richo, they've just got tax rates now which are the lowest in half a century.
Yeah, but
and we've seen a positive result of that.
Josh, people have to believe you. If your numbers don't add up on that GST increase, then you've got a problem. But it's worse than that. I mean, you just talked about debt. Now, if you look at net debt, you're just looking at your debt and you take the cash in hand off it, that's incredibly high again. You know, it's forecast to be 286 billion or something. That's the highest dollar figure it's been. The highest dollar figure it's been ever. I mean, it isn't going down, it just keeps going up.
Well, it is actually going down compared to where it was gone under the Labor Party. It was more than $100 billion.
No, but you're the blokes who said you'd get us back in a surplus in a hurry. You can't. You're telling me that there's been population growth and all the rest. You can't just look at past years. All right, you can't keep looking at what Labor did. You've now been in power 2 years, right? You've got to start looking at what you can do. Now, net debt hasn't gone down. When will it?
Well, can I actually say that to you? You're wrong on that, Richo. We inherited a budget deficit of $48 billion. Right, this year it's going to be $35 billion. In 3 years' time, it's going to be $7 billion, and then after that, we'll get into surplus.
In 3 years' time, it's going to be $7 billion if we agree that your budget figures are right. And there was basically a consensus at that summit last week that they're wrong, and B, that you keep bracket creep. I mean, you can't have it always. Some stage, you've got to say, well, all right, we're abolishing bracket creep, but we're going to do this to fix it. Nobody has told us what you're going to do to fix it, how you replace the 5 or 6 billion.
Well, Richo, when we announced our budget in May, and it was warmly received in particular sectors of the economy like small business, and we've seen some real positive flow-on effects from that. You had a number of economists, for example, Bill Evans from Westpac and Alan Oster from NAB, saying that our forecasts were very credible. Then you had Labor's, economist of choice, Stephen Koukoulas, saying that our forecasts were conservative. You look at the iron ore price today at $50. Well, we budgeted for a $48 iron ore price. You look at the inflation rate, it's today at 1.5%. We said it was going to be 1.75%.
I'm looking at the growth rate. No one wants to talk about the growth rate, because last week at that summit, virtually everybody agreed. Everybody. The economists have changed their mind because the world has changed. Everyone's got to look at what's happening in the world. And it just staggers me that the government doesn't seem to want to acknowledge there might be a problem. But look, I'm really sorry, but I'm getting a lot of pressure to go. But Josh, I hope we can do it again, because there are so many questions to answer on this, and at least I've got to say something about you as a Liberal government minister. You do make some sense, so I'd love to have you back.
Thanks, Rich. I look forward to joining you back.
He's a good guy, Josh Frydenberg. It's just that it's really difficult to put such a lousy case. But if you're putting a lousy case, put someone like him up, he puts it well. I shall be back in just a moment with Jeff Smith, an Australian businessman with a very interesting story.